my beloved children. I see you right now, wherever you are. Some of you are sitting alone in a quiet room, some listening through a small, glowing screen, while the world outside keeps moving. I feel the hour of your evening, the hum of electricity, the slow breath of night settling in. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is there, so our hearts may feel closer across distance. Tonight, I will tell you a story of hunger and warmth, of cold winters and shared bread, of two souls who did not know they were shaping each other's fate. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's gently ease into tonight's storytelling journey together. The winter of 1942 arrived early in Leningrad. Snow fell not like feathers, but like ash-heavy, silent, endless. The Neva River froze so solid that carts crossed it as if it were stone. Hunger lived in every doorway, every stairwell, every breath. In a narrow communal apartment on the outskirts of the city, two boys sat wrapped in coats that were too thin to keep out the cold. Their names were Mikhail Petrov and Alexei Morozov. Both were 14 years old. Both had lost their fathers to the war. Both had mothers who tried to stretch nothing into something. They met in October of that year, in a bread line that curved like a wounded snake around a gray brick building. The ration was 125 grams per person, a piece so small it disappeared in your palm. Mikhail stood shivering, his boots cracked at the seams. Alexei noticed first not the boots, but the way Mikhail swayed, as if the ground itself were uncertain. "Are you okay?" Alexei whispered. Mikhail nodded, though his eyes told a different truth. They did not know then that this simple question would bind their lives together. On November 19, 1942, the temperature dropped to minus 30 degrees Celsius. The city groaned under the weight of cold and shelling. That morning, Alexei's mother collapsed while chopping frozen cabbage. She never stood up again. By evening, Alexei was alone. Mikhail's mother died 2 weeks later, quietly in her sleep. Hunger did not announce itself loudly. It simply took what little strength remained. The boys moved into the same room, a decision made not with words, but with silence. Two mattresses pushed together, one window sealed with rags. A single spoon they shared. Bread became the center of their universe. Every morning at dawn, they walked together to the ration office on Ligovsky Prospect. Their breath formed clouds in the dark. Sometimes one would stumble, and the other would steady him. They learned to walk slowly, to conserve energy, to speak less. On December 3rd, 1942, Mikhail collapsed in the snow just meters from the door. Alexei dragged him inside, begged the clerk to let him rest. The clerk looked away, pretending not to see. That night, Alexei broke his bread in half. He had not planned to. His hands simply did it. Mikhail protested weakly. "You'll starve." Alexei smiled, thin and pale. "Then we starved together." From that day on, they never ate alone. They developed rituals. Bread was divided exactly. Crumbs were saved. They chewed slowly, eyes closed, as if tasting memory rather than food. Sometimes Alexei would pretend he was full, slipping a piece back toward Mikhail when he thought he wasn't looking. Sometimes Mikhail would do the same. Neither ever admitted it. January 1943 came with rumors of hope. The siege, people whispered, might break. The road of life across Lake Ladoga was opening more frequently. Supplies trickled in, never enough, but enough to keep hope breathing. On January 18th, artillery thundered differently, louder, closer. The city listened. That evening, Alexei did not come back from the ration line. Mikhail waited by the door until night swallowed the hallway. He waited through the cold, through the ache in his stomach, through the fear he refused to name Dot at dawn. He found Alexei at a field hospital near Moskovsky Gate. A shell had exploded near the line. Shrapnel tore into Alexei's leg. "You should have eaten your bread," Alexei whispered, trying to smile. Mikhail pressed the loaf into his hands. "We share, always." The doctor said Alexei might not walk again. Infection was a threat. Hunger was worse. For 3 days, Mikhail stayed by his side. He gave Alexei his entire ration. On the 4th day, Mikhail collapsed when he woke. He was in a different bed, thinner, weaker, alive. Alexei's bed was empty. A nurse told him Alexei had been transferred east, evacuated across Ladoga with the wounded. Mikhail never got to say goodbye. Spring came slowly. The snow melted into black water. The siege loosened its grip. Those scars remained everywhere. Mikhail survived. He worked unloading trucks. He learned to live with the quiet absence beside him. Years passed. In May 1959, in the city now called Leningrad again, Mikhail stood in line at a bakery. The smell of fresh bread filled the air. For a moment, he could not breathe. A man behind him spoke. "It smells better than it tastes, doesn't it?" Mikhail turned. Alexei stood there, older, thinner, walking with a limp, smiling with the same eyes. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Alexei said, "Do you remember how we shared one loaf?" Mikhail nodded, tears blurring the room. "I think," Alexei said softly, "that bread kept me alive longer than food ever could." They bought a loaf together, sat on a bench near the Neva. broke it in half, and the world, for a moment, was whole again. They sat there longer than either of them expected. The river moving slowly beside them, gray and patient, as if it had learned the art of endurance from the people who lived along its banks. The bread between them was warm, its crust firm under their fingers. It was no longer rationed, no longer weighed by grams, yet neither of them hurried to eat. Old habits, once carved by hunger, do not fade easily. Alexei broke his half again, placing a smaller piece back into Mikhail's hand. The gesture was automatic, almost unconscious. "You still do that?" Mikhail said quietly. Alexei looked down at his fingers, then smiled with a hint of sadness. Some things stay in the body, even when the years pass. They spoke of what had followed that winter. Alexei told of the evacuation across Lake Ladoga in February 1943. The bitter wind cutting through the truck's canvas, the sound of ice cracking beneath the wheels. He spoke of hospitals in Yaroslavl, then a long recovery in a village near Kostrom, where an old woman taught him to walk again, using a wooden cane and stubborn patience. Infection had come close, but it did not take him. Hunger tried again, but neighbors shared what little they had. "I kept thinking of you," Alexei said. "I kept wondering if you survived." Mikhail told his own story of unloading supplies when the blockade finally weakened, of sleeping in stairwells because the room felt too empty alone, of the silence that followed victory, a silence heavier than the bombs. He spoke of studying engineering, of rebuilding bridges, of marrying late because part of him felt frozen in that winter for a long time. "I never stopped looking," Mikhail admitted. "I checked lists, hospitals, evacuation records. Then one day, I told myself, you were alive, somewhere. I had to believe that." They finished the bread at last, brushing crumbs from their coats, like men completing a sacred ritual. The sun dipped lower, staining the river with pale gold dot. From that day on, they met often. Sometimes at the bakery, sometimes walking slowly along the embankment, Alexei's limp setting their pace. They spoke not only of the past, but of ordinary things. The price of potatoes, the noise of the trams, the strange relief of peace. In 1963, when Alexei's daughter was born, he asked Mikhail to be her godfather. At the small baptism, in a quiet church, still bearing war scars, Mikhail held the child and felt something settle inside him, like a door gently closing. Years continued their quiet march. The city changed names again. Buildings rose, others fell. Winters still came, but none ever felt as cruel as the one that had bound them together. On a cold evening in December 1988, Alexei fell ill. His heart, weakened by years of strain, began to fail. Mikhail visited him daily at the hospital near Nevsky Prospect. They spoke little now. Words were no longer necessary. One evening, as snow began to fall outside the window, Alexei reached for Mikhail's hand. "Do you remember," he whispered, "the first day you didn't faint in the bread line?" Mikhail smiled faintly. "I do. That was the day," Alexei said, his voice slowing. "I knew we would survive. Not because we were strong, but because we shared." Those were his last clear words. Alexei passed away before dawn on December 14th, 1988, at the funeral. Mikhail placed a small loaf of bread beside the coffin. No one questioned it. Those who had lived through those years understood. Mikhail lived many more seasons. Each winter, he fed birds near the river, breaking bread into small pieces, watching them gather without fear. When neighbors asked why, he would simply say, "Because no one should eat alone." In his final years, his hands shook, but the ritual remained steady. Bread was always broken, never torn, and when Mikhail finally laid down to rest in the spring of 2001, there was peace on his face, as if somewhere beyond sight. A familiar hand had reached out to steady him once more. The world moved on. The story was not written in books or carved into monuments. It lived quietly, passed from heart to heart, carried in the simple act of sharing. And perhaps that is how the truest stories are meant to remain. Now let your breathing slow. Let the images soften. The frozen streets fade into gentle light, the river into a quiet ribbon of silver. Remember this, my beloved children. What you give in love is never lost. What you share in darkness becomes light for another. Walk gently with one another. Break your bread. Warm your hearts. And when the night feels long, know that you are not alone. Amen.